Okay, so for my final exam, I'm going to be talking about two instances that continue to occur at my elementary school. I'm a migrant tutor at an elementary school in Alamo, and the first chapter is going to be language diversity, which is chapter 5. Most of these kids, if not all the kids that I deal with, their first language is Spanish and their second language is English. So I do help them out with their English fluency, reading, writing, and things like that. At my school, and I think this goes for most schools, my school is bilingual. They teach bilingual, so for example, they'll have Spanish days and they'll have English days. Spanish days they'll focus on Spanish grammar and reading and things like that. And another day they'll focus on English fluency, reading, grammar, and things like that. So they're getting the kids that primarily speak Spanish. They're getting the Spanish practice in school, and most of the time, I believe that when they go home, their parents either speak strictly Spanish or very little English. So they're getting it at home and at school. Now, in terms of the English, they're just getting it at school. So when they go home, they don't really practice what they've learned, at home. So it doesn't really retain as well as the Spanish does. And, it's hard for those kids to really grasp what they learn when they don't go home and practice it, or when they don't do their homework and practice it. And that's where chapter 11 comes in. Chapter 11, which is observational learning, and specifically the modeling strategy. So most of the time, the modeling strategy is what I use in terms of reading to the kids and have the kids pronouncing the words properly, things like that. So for second grade and even first grade and kindergarten, when I'm reading with them, we're giving little books, maybe 20-page books, just so they can get the hang of reading. So what we'll do is I'll read the entire book with them, which it's really, really short, maybe a paragraph, maybe 3 or 4 sentences each page. So I'll read the entire book with them. I'll read a sentence or a couple words, and they'll repeat after me, and I make sure that they're pronouncing the words correctly. If I were to have them do a cold read, it would be very start and stop, and it would just be all over the place because they would not know how to pronounce the words correctly. And sometimes I don't want to stop the kids while they're reading. So what I do is I'll read a little bit with them and have them repeat what I say, so they can understand how to pronounce some of those words. They might not know what those words mean yet, and I get to that a little bit later once they know how to pronounce it. But for right now, I make sure they know how to say it and how to pronounce it and things like that. So I'll do that with them, and then once we read the entire book together, then I have each of them read it individually to me aloud, just to make sure that they're understanding and that they're pronouncing the words correctly. And that seems to really work well with me. Observational learning and the modeling strategy really helps. And going a little bit back to the language diversity, a lot of these kids, like I said, they're not getting the practice at home, which is really hurting them in the long run. And sometimes I feel like the parents don't realize it, or if they do, maybe they just can't help them at home, which is totally understandable. But it would just be great if they would get the same practice at home with Spanish as they do with English, or even vice versa. You'd be surprised that these kids, these migrant workers, or these migrant students that I deal with, they may speak Spanish better than English, but when it comes to reading Spanish, they have a hard time reading Spanish. And when I think about it, I'm pretty sure they speak Spanish at home. They just don't practice reading Spanish at home. It's kind of weird to see that they can speak Spanish well, but they can't read Spanish well. But yeah, those are the 2 chapters that I was focusing on for this final exam.